What's up, everyone? Well, I was working on this tree today and I realized that I use the terms early, middle, and late development quite a bit. And so today I'm going to go over what the differences are and why it's important. So what I'm doing on this tree basically is a second wiring, and if you look at the structure, this is a collected wild trunk that's had two approach grafts added to it to create the crown. And the approach grafts were grown out to have long whips, like basically starting here and going all the way out to here. And then in the first wiring, all of those whips were wired down and out to become the kind of foundation of the crown. That would be kind of, early development because you're creating all of the branches. Now, I've already had this has grown out 2 years since the last time it was wired, and basically what I'm doing now is more branch optimization, creating more space and creating the pattern that the branches need to have in order for them to be able to be maintained long term. So I'm almost done with the development phase of this tree. It's reaching maturity, basically at the point where I'm done doing this wiring and styling. It will be relatively mature, even if the crown isn't completely mature. At that point, all the techniques that we'll be using will be aimed at just maintaining the branch structure rather than creating the branch structure. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and cut back some of these things. So this branch is kind of shading this branch, and because of the structural way that they relate up here, I'm going to shorten this one and keep this one longer. So for this session, I've gone through and done a combination of things. One, this pad was developing a little bit ahead of the rest of the tree, so I've gone through and kind of treated it almost like a mature pad. And for the rest of the tree, like the back and the top here, I'm still positioning secondary branches. And like I said before, the primary branches that I had that have been wired down here, some of them were shortened for the purpose of thinning things out to encourage the secondary branches to elongate more. So now that we've got this silhouette completed, in another couple of years, the tree will really move into sort of a mature maintenance kind of phase where you're doing less wiring on a regular basis and just continuing to grow the plant and allow the foliage to fill in, and then using regular maintenance techniques, which are the most commonly taught techniques on this tree from this point forward. So it's really through the late development stage and ready for mature techniques. Now that we've taken a look at this, let's take a look at some of the middle development techniques that you would use on junipers. This is a field-grown Kishu that I bought a couple of years ago, and I've worked on it before, but because there is still a long way to go with this tree in terms of the overall structure, I consider this to be in middle development. So I'm going to work on it today, and the primary thing I'm going to do, or the thing I'm going to do first, is just to do what I do with any juniper when I start working on it, and that is to just kind of come in here and clean up the bottoms of these branches so that I can do a structural analysis of the tree and then decide what the next steps are. All right, it's really tempting to kind of call it at this point and just cut off all the excess branching and essentially make a bonsai out of this. So in order to demonstrate kind of what I'm talking about, let me grab a towel and sort of block out the parts of the foliage that would be cut off. All right, so maybe that gives you a little bit more of an idea of kind of where this is headed. And like I said, it's really tempting to go ahead and cut all of those branches off and start styling this tree. But I think there's still some structural issues here that need to be overcome. And in order to do that, I need to use growing techniques, which involve leaving large sacrifice branches. So this particular piece of field grown material already has a nice shari here and some rollover starting where the lifeline is going around that shari. That's a really common feature in yamadori, but in field grown material, you don't see it as much. And so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through here, and the last time I worked on this tree, I cut off a lot of these branches in order to use, in order to direct the tree in terms of creating a crown into this area instead of way off to the side. And so I'm going to clean up these jin, and I'm going to clean up the resulting shari here that I worked on last time. And then I'm also going to take a look at the lower section of the trunk. One of the things that's really interesting about this piece of material is that it actually has the beginnings of two separate lifelines. And since this piece here is one of the most important parts that I'm trying to grow, which if it died, I could replace it with something else, but would cost me a couple of years. Tracing the lifeline down, so there's a little bit of a twist here. And when I eliminated all of these branches a couple of years ago, I was concerned that I might be damaging the lifeline too much if I went further. So I sort of eliminated these and then left everything to grow. Now it's obvious that this lifeline has bulged since I did that 2 years ago. So you can see that the lifeline is basically coming up through here and straight up around all of these wounds that I've made. So it has this nice shari down here, but on the back side of this, there is no shari. However, if I follow this section down, it looks like it's going to go back there and come down onto the back of this piece of wood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here, and I'm going to strip bark going down the trunk towards the base and create basically a second shari on the back of this. That's going to force the tree to continue to deposit wood here and down in here, which will help me thicken this portion of the trunk. But more interestingly, it'll help it sort of just create more interest. And rather than having just a round trunk, I will have something that starts to become more like a yamadori with a little bit of a ribbon shape to the trunk. All right, I've peeled it back from here, and I'm going to spin the tree around so that I can continue it down on the back. It's right here, and I was hoping it would be more up in here. So I'm gonna stop that right here, and I'm gonna move down towards the base. All right, I think that's enough shari work for today. So just to review, with this middle development work, a lot of times you're not really doing much. Maybe just a little bit of shari work or a little bit of cleanup work to keep branches from getting shaded out. It's as diverse as the work on bonsai is. But the point is that sometimes doing little operations in the midst of growing your tree for a while can be really important. And this isn't early development because I've already got the majority of the structure set here. So I really don't consider this early development, but that's what we're going to take a look at next. So when I talk about early development, what I'm really generally talking about is either creating or modifying a trunk line or the trunk line and the primary branches. And so I do a lot of this work right now, and it's one of the things that I feel like a lot of people just sort of skip over. So starting from cuttings, which is propagation, not early development. This is 2.5 years old, and it's got a section that's already been wired here with these 2 shoots on it, but then it's also got this shoot. So it's just like middle development in the sense that sometimes there's one simple operation that we have to do in early development to make the difference between a really good tree and a mediocre tree later. And so even though I've put some movement in here the last time this was wired, I'm actually going to go ahead and wire this a second time so that I can ensure that these guys, these shoots that have come out this year, actually I have to say I'm really happy. A lot of these junipers are growing really nicely this year, as opposed to the first full growing season that they had. Well, the first growing season is just in a cutting flat, letting the roots get established, and then they're transplanted into these containers. And in the first growing season in this container, the second growing season overall, the growth was not nearly as robust as this. So the roots are obviously established. So I'm going to go ahead and put a wire on this. All right, so here comes the critical part, and that is basically that I want to add movement to these, but I don't want to crack the branch here, or the most common splitting point is actually right here at this junction where the 2 major branches come together. So I'm going to try to wrap the wire around those 2. I'm going to try to basically hold that junction in place while I create some movement by twisting and just adding movement and twists is ideal in junipers. Remember, if you want to make irregular movement, you can start by making a corkscrew, which is your sort of natural tendency when you're bending using a wire that's been coiled around the branch. But then if you take that coil that you create and bend it a little bit more so that it's more irregular, you end up with something that is a little bit more interesting than just a regular coil. I'm not trying to peg a front here. I'm not trying to do anything other than just set myself up for having lots of good options later. Here's one I did the other day, and I'm at this recently I've been doing, a few flats every day basically. So that's late, middle, and early development on junipers as an illustration of the types of stages that they go through. We've organized a lot of the back content of the Bonsaify YouTube channel into playlists. So check out the early and middle development playlists and see if you find anything else that you're interested in watching. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.